For 10,000 years, the celestial empire of Draxos was ruled by a leader whose real name was its most guarded secret. It was a name whispered only in the hearts of dying stars, a name no living being was supposed to know. This name was the key to its power, the very anchor of its consciousness. But on the day it died, its final command wasn't about succession or conquest. It was a single, desperate plea broadcast across the entire cosmos: find the human who knows my name. That human was a grieving maintenance worker on a forgotten planet, and he had no idea the dying creature he'd once sheltered on his porch was about to turn the galaxy upside down. Walter Reed was a man made of quiet routines and very loud sorrows. His whole world had shrunk down to the polished halls of Celestial Archive Station Epsilon 9, a place where history was stored but none was ever made. He was a maintenance worker, a janitor of silence and order. Every morning, he'd get up in his small, sterile room, the window showing the same indifferent swirl of a distant nebula. He'd pull on his gray uniform, worn thin at the elbows, and start his rounds. The station was basically a ghost town, run by a skeleton crew and haunted by the digital specters of a billion dead civilizations packed away in its data cores. For Walter, the silence was a blessing. It had been 3 years since Alara, his wife, was taken by the wasting sickness that hit their colony on Kepler 186f. 3 years since all the color drained from his world, leaving only the dull gray of the station's walls. They had dreamed of seeing the galaxy together, retiring to a world with actual oceans and a yellow sun. Instead, he took this job, getting as far away from the painful memories of his old life as he could. Here his grief was just another silent echo in the giant empty halls. His job was the only thing keeping him tethered. He mopped floors that were already clean, the rhythmic slosh and squeak of the mop a kind of mantra against the memories that kept trying to break in. He replaced light panels that hadn't even burned out yet. The click of the new unit seating into place, a small, satisfying win against the universe's slow decay. He was good at his job. He knew the station's guts, its maze of pipes and vents better than the architects who designed it. He knew its groans and sighs, the way the recycled air tasted different on the lower levels, the exact hum of the main life support system. His colleagues, the handful of archivists and techs on board, mostly left him alone. They saw the permanent sadness in his eyes and noticed how he never joined them in the commissary, preferring a nutrient-paced bar in some quiet supply closet. They knew he was a man nursing a wound that wouldn't heal, and so they gave him the one thing he seemed to want: space. It was during one of these self-imposed exiles that he found it. He was running a diagnostic on the atmospheric regulators in Sector Gamma 7, a dusty, forgotten part of the station scheduled to be decommissioned. Following a mislabeled conduit, he found himself in a corridor that wasn't on any schematic. At the end was a single, heavy blast door, the kind used for radiation shielding. A tarnished plate was bolted to it, the inscription barely readable under a layer of dust: Chamber 734, Resonant Crystal Archive, Level 5 Bioorganic Signature, do not enter. The warning should have been enough. His job was to maintain order, not poke at mysteries. But something pulled him in. Maybe it was just the novelty of it all in a life built on repetition. Or maybe it was a flicker of the man he used to be, the curious man Alara had fallen in love with. With a grunt, he pulled the manual release lever. The door, silent for who knows how long, hissed open, revealing a small, dark space. He stepped inside. The room was a perfect cube, maybe 10 feet square. The air was cold and still, and it smelled like ozone and something else, something ancient and deeply strange. Right in the center of the room sat a large, crystalline structure inside a clear preservation field. It wasn't one crystal, but a whole cluster of them, each as long as his arm and fused together at the base. They were a deep amethyst purple, but they seemed to soak up the light from his headlamp, giving nothing back. They pulsed with a slow, faint inner light, like the dying embers of a cosmic fire. Walter didn't feel scared. Instead, this profound and inexplicable sense of peace washed over him. The constant buzz of his own anxiety went quiet for the first time in years. He walked closer, placing a hand on the cool surface of the preservation case. He just stood there for a long time, breathing. This room felt like a sanctuary, a place outside of time, outside of his grief. This was the porch, and on it, something ancient and very, very tired was resting. The chamber became his secret. He told no one, logging the corridor as a dead end on his maintenance report. Every day on his break he'd make his way to Sector Gamma 7, open that heavy door, and just sit in the quiet dark with the pulsing crystals. He didn't know what they were, and he didn't care. He was a maintenance guy, not a scientist. All he knew was that in this room, the weight on his soul felt just a little bit lighter. One Tuesday, his grief came back with a vengeance. It was the anniversary of the day he'd met Alara. The memories were sharp, relentless. Her laugh as they ran through a field of glowing fungi, the taste of her favorite spicy popcorn, the feel of her hand in his as they watched their colony's twin suns set. The pain was a physical thing. Like a knot of razors in his chest, he practically ran to Chamber 734, stumbling into the dark and collapsing against the preservation case. The cold of the casing did nothing to numb the fire in his heart. Tears streamed down his face as silent sobs shook his whole body. He was just adrift, a tiny speck of sorrow in a universe that couldn't care less, and then he started to hum. It wasn't a choice. The sound just rose up from his chest, a low, resonant vibration. It wasn't a song he'd ever heard before. It was simple, just a few rising and falling notes, a pattern of pure, instinctual sound. It was the melody of his own loneliness, a wordless expression of a grief too deep for words. As he hummed, the air in the room seemed to get thicker. The crystals, which had always pulsed with a slow, steady rhythm, began to change. The faint purple light inside them brightened, shifting to a warmer, gentler gold. The rhythm of their pulsing shifted, trying to match the cadence of his sad little tune. Walter didn't notice. His eyes were closed, lost in his own world of pain. He was just offering up his grief to the only thing that seemed to be listening, the silent, crystalline thing in the dark. For an hour he sat there, humming his simple, heartbreaking song. He had no idea he wasn't alone. He couldn't have known that the crystal structure was a psychic resonator, connected across thousands of light years to a consciousness of unimaginable power. He didn't know that this being, the great sky dragon of Draxos, was wounded and fading, its mind sheltered inside this ancient artifact, and he certainly had no idea that the simple, sad melody he hummed was, in the ancient, telepathic language of dragons, a name, a true name. He was a man giving a name to a god, and he just thought he was crying in the dark. Over the next few months, he kept coming back, and each time he would hum his song. It became a healing ritual. He poured his loss into the melody, and the chamber seemed to absorb it, offering a strange, silent comfort in return. Unknowingly, he was providing solace. He was letting a weary dragon sleep on his porch, sheltering it with his own sorrow. Slowly, his grief began to fade. The sharp edges softened. Memories of Alara started to bring more warmth than pain. He even found himself thinking about the future, not just the past. His visits to Chamber 734 grew less frequent until, one day, he realized he hadn't been back in weeks. He'd found his peace. He didn't need the chamber anymore. 3 years passed. Walter Reed kept mopping floors and fixing lights. He was still quiet, but the crushing weight was gone from his shoulders. He was healing. The secret of Chamber 734 was just a forgotten chapter in his journey through grief. The end of an era began not with a bang, but with a silent scream that tore across the galaxy. From the heart of the Draxian Empire, the great sky dragon, the celestial emperor, who had kept 1,000 star systems in balance for 10 millennia, finally began to die. Its physical body, a magnificent creature of stellar plasma and woven light, began to dim, and from its fading mind came the pulse. It was a psychic tsunami that washed over every sentient mind in the Milky Way. On 100,000 worlds, telepaths and mystics collapsed in agony. They were flooded with a torrent of sensation, the cold of the void, the warmth of a billion suns, the crushing weight of 10,000 years of memory, and an ancient, profound sorrow. And inside that wave, a single, clear, desperate command burned its way into their minds. Find the human who knows my name. The galaxy went into a tailspin. The Draxian Empire, a pillar of stability, was thrown into chaos. The great dragon was dying. That was as unthinkable as the stars just going out. And its last request wasn't to name a successor, but to find some random human from a backwater species on the galactic fringe. What name? No one knew the great dragon's true name. It was the ultimate secret, the source of its power. To know it was to have a direct connection to the creature itself. The manhunt that followed was the biggest in galactic history. The Empire fractured. Warlords and admirals, long kept in check by the dragon's authority, saw their chance. They sent out their fleets, not to mourn, but to hunt. If they could find this human and get the name, they could claim to be the dragon's chosen successor and legitimize their power grab. Mystical orders who worshipped the dragon also began their search. They believed the human was a prophet, a key to the dragon's final cosmic plan. Meanwhile, in the criminal underworlds, info brokers went into a frenzy. A single name was now the most valuable thing in the universe. Everyone wanted the human. Everyone wanted the secret. And on Station Epsilon, Walter Reed was scrubbing a stubborn stain off the floor. He was vaguely aware of some anxious chatter among the crew and heard the station's resident Betelgeusian archivist complain of a psychic migraine. Walter paid it no mind. He was focused on the stain. It was his job. He was completely oblivious to the fact that the most powerful fleets in the galaxy were mobilizing, that empires were about to go to war, and that he, a humble maintenance worker, was the reason for it all. He was the most wanted man in the universe, and he was wondering what flavor of nutrient paste to have for lunch. The Draxian Seekers, the most skilled telepaths in the Empire, ignored the politics. They focused on the command. They meditated on the psychic pulse, sifting through the sorrow to find the gossamer thin thread of the name itself. It wasn't a word, it was a resonance, a melody. Slowly, painstakingly, they followed that resonance out of the galactic core, past the bustling trade lanes, and into the quiet, forgotten sectors of the outer arms. It led them to a tiny, insignificant speck of light. It led them to Celestial Archive Station Epsilon 9. The arrival was about as subtle as a supernova. One moment the space outside the station was empty. The next it was filled with a dozen massive ships that looked more like celestial whales than starships. Their hulls swirled with color and pulsed with a soft, internal light. They didn't raise shields or power weapons. They just waited, their presence an overwhelming statement of power. On the station's bridge, the commander stared at his screens in total disbelief. These were Draxian Imperial vessels, ships from Legends. A communication request chimed. A towering insectoid figure materialized on the screen. It had 6 delicate limbs and a carapace of polished obsidian. Its head was a cluster of glowing blue crystal eyes. It was a Draxian emissary. "I speak for the will of the sky's greatest leader," its voice echoed, a translated chorus of 1,000 minds. "We have come for the human, the one who knows the name." The station commander could only stare, dumbfounded. The most powerful empire in the galaxy had just parked on his forgotten outpost, looking for a human who held their future in their hands. Walter Reed, meanwhile, was just finishing his shift, completely unaware that destiny, in the form of a dozen city-sized spaceships, had arrived on his doorstep. The collision of these two worlds was coming, and it was going to change everything. But before we see how a simple maintenance man reacts to being the center of the galactic stage, if you're enjoying this story, take a moment to subscribe to the channel. It tells us you want more tales from the far reaches of the universe. Now, let's get back to the station. Section 4. The Hum. Heard round the galaxy, the Draxian Seekers came aboard. They moved with a silent, unnerving grace, their faceted eyes scanning everything, seeing not just the physical world but the psychic echoes left behind. The station's crew was gathered in the hangar bay, a huddle of baffled and terrified beings. Walter stood among them, his gray uniform blending in, his mind just racing with confusion. He figured it had to be some treaty violation, some forgotten rule they'd broken. The emissary addressed the commander. "Our sensitives have tracked the resonance to this station, but it is an echo, baked into the very walls. We cannot pinpoint the source. Bring us every human." There were only 3. Walter, a young data clerk named Anya, and the elderly station botanist. They were brought before the emissary. The Seekers focused their energy, creating a low, humming vibration in the air. "One of you carries the memory," the emissary stated. "The name, a sound, a song. Show us." The botanist, confused, recited a poem about earth roses. Anya, terrified, just stammered her own name. The Seekers shook their heads. The resonance wasn't there. Then the emissary's gaze fell on Walter. He just shrugged. "I'm a maintenance worker. I fix things. I don't know any secret names." You could feel the frustration ripple through the Draxia. Far away, the great dragon's life signs were fading fast. Its massive body was beginning to flake away into clouds of cosmic dust. They were running out of time. The Seekers began a full sweep of the station. As one of them passed the forgotten corridor in Sector Gamma 7, its mind recalled. The resonance was deafening here. It traced the energy to the blast door of Chamber 734. Inside, the crystals, dormant for 3 years, were blazing with light. The psychic energy of the Seekers had acted like a catalyst, waking up the latent memory stored within them. And across the galaxy, the dying dragon felt it. A jolt of recognition, a memory of a quiet room, of profound sorrow, and a gentle, comforting sound. Its life signs, which had been flatlining, suddenly spiked. The Seekers knew they were close. The emissary was brought to the chamber and stared at the glowing crystals with reverence. "This is a sanctum," it whispered, "a place of rest. The resonance is here, but who activated it? They had the place, but not the person." The search stalled again. Walter, released from questioning, had been ordered back to his duties. He figured if aliens were taking over, the least he could do was make sure the floors were clean. He grabbed his cart and began his rounds. A familiar routine, a comfort in all the madness. As he pushed the cart down a long, empty corridor, his mind drifted. And absently, unconsciously, he began to hum. It was the same tune from the chamber, the song of his solitude. A simple, sad, rising and falling melody. A Seeker, standing guard at the end of the hall, froze solid. The psychic resonance it had been searching for, the faint echo they'd tracked across the galaxy, was suddenly right here. And it wasn't an echo. It was a live broadcast, clear as a bell. The Seeker's head snapped towards the source. It was the maintenance worker, the unassuming human in the gray uniform, pushing a mop bucket. He was humming the great dragon's true name. The Seeker didn't run. It sent a single explosive thought to the emissary: found. Seconds later, Walter was surrounded. He stopped humming, his blood running cold. He looked at the imposing alien figures, at their glowing eyes all fixed on him, and was certain his life was over. The sound, the emissary's voice, boomed in his mind, laced not with a threat, but with desperate awe. "Make the sound again." Walter was trembling. "What sound?" I don't know what you're talking about." "The song," the emissary urged, its voice softening. "The one you were just humming, please." Confused and terrified, Walter did the only thing he could. He closed his eyes and hummed. He hummed the simple, sad melody that had been his only friend through his darkest hours. The moment the first note left his lips, everything changed. A wave of golden light erupted from chamber 734, so bright it shone through the station's walls. The crystals inside flared with the brilliance of 1,000 suns, and across the galaxy, in the Draxos system, the dying sky dragon heard. Its massive form, which had gone dark, lit up one last time. It wasn't the fiery light of its prime, but a soft, gentle, peaceful glow. A final telepathic pulse washed over the cosmos. It held no command, no sorrow, no desperation. It was a wave of pure, unfiltered gratitude, and within it the entire galaxy felt a memory, a lonely, grieving man, sitting in a dark room, offering the simple gift of a song to a weary traveler. Then, the light of the great dragon faded, and it was gone. The chaos that had gripped the Draxian Empire stopped. The warlords and admirals who had felt the final broadcast were humbled. The name wasn't a weapon to be wielded. It was a story of compassion, a reminder that even the greatest beings can find solace in the smallest acts of kindness. The hunt for power was replaced by a shared sense of reverence. The Empire, instead of shattering, was united by a new foundational myth, the myth of the human in the song. Walter stood in the corridor, stunned into silence. The emissary and the seekers were bowing to him, a deep, prostrating bow of absolute respect. "You are the name-giver," the emissary said, its voice filled with emotion. "The shelter of the sky. You gave comfort to our leader in its final, weary years. You gave it a name not of power but of peace. The Draxian Empire is forever in your debt." Walter Reed's life as a maintenance worker was over. He was brought to Draxos, not as a prisoner or a king, but as a figure of honor. He, who had been defined by what he lost, was now defined by what he had given. He wanted no power, no riches. All he had done was express his own pain, and in doing so, had healed a god. They showed him the empty celestial throne, a vortex of starlight where the great dragon once reigned. They showed him the stellar nursery where, in a few millennia, a new sky dragon would be born. And they asked him to stay, not as a ruler, but as a keeper of the story, a living testament to their new guiding principle. Walter, the man who only wanted to be left alone, found a new purpose at the center of the galaxy. His life was no longer small or silent. It was now a testament to the most powerful force in the universe, a force the Draxians were only just beginning to understand, the profound and unpredictable power of simple human empathy. The galaxy wasn't saved by an army, but by a grieving man with a sad song in his heart. If this story resonated with you, hit that like button and let us know in the comments what you think the dragon's name sounded like. And don't forget to subscribe and ring that bell so you don't miss our next journey into the vast, surprising, and often beautiful unknown. Thanks for watching.